Hello folks, Minmax Munchkin back with a video about the newest 2020 Unearthed Arcana, which introduces a bunch of conjuration spells and a new type of magic items, the special magic tattoos. So let's explore these new playtest options. As stated, most of the new spells belong to the conjuration school of magic. They allow various spellcasting classes to summon distinct spirits. Still, there are a couple of other spells as well, so let's analyze and dissect each and every one of them. Acid Stream is decent enough for a level 1 spell, despite the dexterity save or suck mechanic and concentration requirement. The line area of effect is long enough to catch 2 enemies easily in most situations, and if just one of them fails the saving throw, it can choose to either take 3d4 acid damage every round or waste a turn to prevent even more damage in subsequent turns. I don't think buffing the spell to 3d6 or even 4d4 damage would make it overpowered, so if it becomes official I hope to see something along those lines. The damage isn't high either way, but if the combat lasts for more than 2 rounds, it will accumulate fast. Acid damage type is less resisted than fire and cold, for example, which are often used for lower level spells, so that's good too. Due to concentration requirement, I probably wouldn't keep this spell learned as a sorcerer for too long, unless it's draconic with Black Dragon Ancestry maybe. I'd be okay with it on a wizard because they can learn a lot more spells. Otherworldly Form is kind of like Tensor's Transformation, but different and, in my opinion, better overall. First, unlike Tensor's Transformation, you actually can cast spells while it's active. Second, it's not a wizard exclusive, it is also available to clerics, sorcerers and warlocks. Third, while it only lasts a minute instead of 10, the 4 different damage immunities you can choose from are much more impactful and relevant at such high levels than 50 temporary hit points provided by Tensor's Transformation, especially considering the amount of types of damage you take as tier 3 character. The AC buff probably isn't as relevant at higher levels, but the flying speed is clutch in many situations in tier 3. Temporary magic weapons is great for Great Weapon Master feat and Sharpshooter feat Gish characters. Granted, you might just have +1 weapons at that point, but if you don't, now you get to ignore all resistances and immunities to non-magic attacks. And just like Tensor's Transformation, you basically get extra attack for the duration of the spell. Now, Tensor's Transformation does provide advantage on weapon attack rolls, 2d12 extra force damage and proficiency in all armor, weapons, strength and constitution saves, but honestly only the extra damage is solid, because if you don't already have those other proficiencies and at least one source of advantage, you're probably in no position to turn into a pseudo-martial character in the first place. Spirit Shroud is kind of like an attack roll-oriented version, like an offshoot of Spirit Guardians. On the surface, it seems a bit weaker as it lasts only a minute and the difficult terrain AoE is only 10 feet instead of 15 feet. But it features the same duality with radiant and necrotic damage, the only difference being that those aren't tied to your character's alignment. Instead, you get to choose which type of damage this spell deals. It's also not a cleric only spell, with paladins, warlocks and wizards having access to it too. The caveat with this spell is that you have to be very close to the enemy, so while you can theoretically exploit it with the good old Warlock for absolutely ridiculous Eldritch Blast damage, in reality, in most cases, you would have to get right next to the enemy and would likely have to roll attacks with disadvantage because the enemy would get into melee with you, or you'd simply lose concentration after taking a lot of damage. So I kind of see this spell mostly used by melee Gish characters who are able to attack at least 3 times per round. Even then, I'd probably pick another spell to concentrate on. However, look, in a party full of frontliners, maybe establishing a protective perimeter around you, the idea of Hexblade Sorcerer with Crossbow Expert feat, which by the way the feat cancels out disadvantage on all ranged attacks, not just weapon attacks, Casting 2 Eldritch Blasts for 8d10 plus 48d8 plus 88, which is basically 350 average damage per round, dealing this ridiculous stupid supernova damage round after round sounds very, very, very enticing and probably even somewhat doable and plausible. And if a wizard wishes a simulacrum of you, you're effectively dishing out 700 damage every round with a mere cantrip. This also really shows how Unearthed Arcana is a wonderful and scary place full of broken, unbalanced concepts, because if I can break the game this easily without even trying that hard or that much, imagine what someone with more time, knowledge and research can do. By the way, if you like listening to me breaking the game with broken characters, dealing broken damage, breaking combat encounters and breaking your DMs, scroll a bit below, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel and bang the notification bell. I have about 100 other videos on this channel, so take a peek when you get the time. I'm sure you'll find at least something that piques your morbid interests. Next up are a bunch of conjuration spells that follow the same general design principle and pattern. They are 1 hour concentration, level 2 or higher spells that summon spiritual creatures under caster's control, under basically your control, requiring no action economy to issue commands to. They disappear when the spell ends, or if those creatures, those spirits, drop to 0 hit points. The spells are distributed across different class spell lists based on general tropes and archetypes associated with such spellcasters. They all require a couple hundred gold worth of material components, usually some valuables like gemstones or specially designed treasure pieces. The spiritual creatures come in 2 to 4 forms, all with their special distinct traits and stats reflecting the theme and flavor. The spirits are friendly to you and your companions, and their turns come right after yours, sharing your initiative count. Their core stats are all identical. Armor class equals 11 plus the level of the spell. Hit points equal constitution modifier plus spellcasting modifier plus spell level times 10. All spirits have multi-attacks that equal half the spell's level, rounded down. Their attack rolls at the spell level on top of the attack roll that they usually get. And their damage rolls also use the spell level, though using different dice and ability scores, so there is a little bit more variety in damage, not just the damage amount, but the damage types as well. All the spirit summoning spells can all be upcasted with higher level slots, so basically you can improve all of these creatures' base stats even further. Obviously, there are a plethora of other stats and traits that differ from one spirit creature and even one spirit form to another, so let's dive deeper into each and every one of these spells. Summon Aberrant Spirit is a 4th level spell contained within the Sorcerer, Warlock and Wizard spell lists, which only makes sense considering how all 3 classes often borrow powers from strange, forgotten and forbidden sources. The Aberrant Spirit is a medium-sized aberration that comes in 3 forms: Beholderkin, Sladi and Star Spawn, paying homage to the 3 classic D&D aberrations. All 3 forms have 30 feet walking speed and flying speed. The spirit is strength-based with decent constitution score and intelligence being sort of its main and really only mental stat. It's immune to psychic damage, has 60 feet dark vision, and its passive perception is not that great, to be honest. However, it more than compensates for that downside, with Beholderkin being able to hover, Sladi having a hefty 10 hit points self-regeneration, and Star Spawn dealing a bit more psychic damage in melee via its 5 feet whispering aura. Each form has its distinct attack option. Beholderkin's Eye Ray is the only ranged option, though I wouldn't mind its range being extended to at least, let's say, 60 feet. Sladi's Claws are awesome against opponents possessing their own regenerative healing capabilities, and the damage is quite nice too. Star Spawn's Psychic Slam doesn't deal a lot of damage on its own, but combined with the aforementioned Whispering Aura, this form is easily the most damaging one of all 3. Summon Bestial Spirit is an obvious addition to Rangers and Druids spell list. It's likely much better on a Druid due to its full spellcasting progression, especially Shepherd Druid with its additional buffs to all summoned creatures and a lack of appropriate 2nd level summoning spell. It conjures a small beast with a lot of strength, decent constitution score, and wisdom as its main mental ability. Standard dark vision of 60 feet is paired with a bit better passive perception of 12. Land form can climb well, water form is obviously a swimmer that can breathe underwater, and air form has a hefty 60 feet flying speed, paired with the notorious flyby trait, allowing this form to attack in melee and retreat to safe distance without provoking opportunity attacks. Land and water are still better for damage maximization, as they both come with pack tactics. The spirit has only one attack option, Maul, but it uses the spirit's hefty strength score to inflict a decent amount of piercing damage. Now, Summon Celestial Spirit is clearly designed for clerics and paladins, though unlike its bestial cousin, it's a 5th level spell, making it out of reach for most paladins out there. You would have to be a 17th level paladin before you can even begin to prepare this spell. The two forms of this large, Celestial, Avenger and Defender, both have a nice 40 feet flying speed. Radiant damage resistance isn't as relevant, as mostly only other Celestials deal that damage type, but immunity to charmed and frightened conditions will come up very often, especially at higher levels when you get this spell. It has a bunch of 16s and 14s in its ability scores, intelligence being the lowest at 10, but they are somewhat underutilized in my opinion, because basically being relegated to slightly better saving throws. See, both forms utilize weapon attacks. There's no spell attacks with Celestials, which is slightly weird. Despite Radiant Bow's hefty range and Radiant damage, and Radiant Mace's potential to both deal damage and provide a significant amount of temporary hit points to nearby allies and itself, I can't help but think that this spirit could somehow benefit from its 14 wisdom and 16 charisma score. Heck, why not make both forms do slightly less damage, maybe even like decrease the range and decrease the damage even a bit more, and instead buff the healing touch to be limited not to once per day, but let's say up to creature's wisdom modifier for clerics, which would offset the fact that clerics have full spellcasting progression, which means they can get this spell sooner than paladins, but then make the paladins version of this spell use charisma as a limit to how many times per day they can use healing touch, so kind of like make it a little bit better in that way to compensate for the fact that they only get it at level 17. It's not like a couple more 2d8 plus 5 or maybe plus 9 is game breaking in any way, shape or form, right? Summon Elemental Spirit is a 4th level Druid, Sorcerer and Wizard spell that for some reason did not get added to Ranger's list of spells. I don't know why. I don't think giving this spell to the class known to be at least somewhat underpowered would break anything. In fact, it just might make it slightly more viable, and thematically it would make sense too, seeing how Rangers borrow a lot of their magic from druids. The medium-sized spirit obviously has 4 elemental forms. They are slightly faster than most other spirits, sporting 40 feet of walking speed with the same rate applied to air forms fly and hover, earth's burrow speed and water's swimming speeds. The spirit is quite strong and tough and for some reason charismatic. The form-fitting damage resistances are probably there for balance reasons, with the only immunity being assigned to the fire form, being fully immune to poison and fire damage. The spirit has a lot of condition immunities too, ignoring exhaustion, paralysis, petrification, poison and even unconsciousness. It's not as perceptive with only 10 in passive perception, but at least it has a 60 feet dark vision. Air, fire and water forms are also able to squeeze through tiny cracks and holes. All 4 forms have just one attack option, Slam, that uses their chunky strength score. Only fire form deals elemental damage, fire of course, while air, earth and water deal bludgeoning. It kind of makes sense because there's no air, earth or water damage type in D&D, so there you go. Summon Phase Spirit is a 3rd level spell given to 5 classes: Bards, Druids, Sorcerers, Warlocks and Wizards. Again, I don't see the reason why not give this spell to Rangers too. The Wandering Lone Wolves are certainly as likely to be exposed and have knowledge of fey powers and fey creatures as much as any other spellcaster. Nevertheless, it's a small phase spirit that comes in 3 forms: Deceitful, Furious and Joyful. It's a dexterity-based creature for a change, with a decent intelligence and charisma scores on top, as well as charm condition immunity. With a dark vision of 60 feet and phase tap bonus action teleport, the phase spirit can swoop in, hurt the enemy, and then simply pop out of danger. The phase step is further amplified by Form's traits, with Deceitful One easily being the most elusive spirit, masking itself with the Blotch of Darkness, Joyful being able to avoid harm by charming the enemy, and Furious being, well, furious to the point of having advantage on an attack roll after teleporting in. The short sword attack option is decent, dealing both piercing and force damage, so even if the creature is immune to non-magical weapon damage, you'll still be able to at least forcefully poke it a little bit. Summon Fiendish Spirit is a high 6th level spell exclusive to wizards and warlocks only. The reason why this large fiend is locked behind such a high level spell is primarily because all 3 forms, Demon, Devil and Yugoloth, have magic resistance trait. Yeah, that thing that gives them advantage on saves against all spells and magic effects. Furthermore, the Demon form has a climbing speed and explodes in a 10-foot radius after dropping to 0 hit points, and the Devil form has a significant 60-foot flying speed and the annoying Devil's Sight, able to see through magical darkness. Devil form is probably the best overall, as it's the only one that comes with a ranged spell attack option with a significant 150-foot range. The only downside to that attack option is that it deals fire damage, which is often resisted and immune, but if you want to avoid this, Demon's Bite deals a nice chunk of necrotic damage, and Yugoloth is probably the least appealing option, with no distinct trait other than its short-range teleport capability tied to its claw attack. Still, if you have to finish a bunch of enemies that are split apart but relatively close to each other, this just might be the trump card to use and finish them all in one go. Then again, I mean, there are spells like Steel Wind Strike that can accomplish that as well, and even sooner and even more. So this ultimately isn't a spell that I would consider in most cases, but I don't think it's unviable, I don't think it's bad, it's just kind of, I'm not gonna say mediocre, but somewhere in my opinion between mediocre and just okay, just alright. Summon Shadow Spirit is a 3rd level sorcerer, warlock and wizard spell that has that typical Shadowfell vibe to it. It's a medium monstrosity with 3 forms, Fury, Despair and Fear. It doesn't have any special movement speeds, but its dark vision range is doubled up to 120 feet. Necrotic damage resistance and frightened condition makes sense for the theme. Fury's bloodthirsty frenzy advantage against frightened creatures synergizes decently with the dreadful scream, though it's not long-lasting due to repeat saving throw mechanic. Fear is a lurker in the shadows and darkness, able to use bonus action to hide. Despair is probably the best for control, significantly reducing movement speeds of your enemies, but also your allies too, so you have to be careful not to use this around your squishies, squishy members in your party. One thing I have a bit of an issue with is its only attack action, Chilling Rend. It does deal a decent amount of damage on a hit, but Cold is often resisted and immune to damage type. Psychic damage would make so much more sense for a negative emotion-driven creature like this one, even if it means taking away 1 damage die or bumping the spell up to level 4. Whatever is required to be nerfed in order to give this thing psychic damage, I think is reason enough to do, because, well, I mean, it's a Shadowfell inspired creature, so why is it dealing cold damage instead of psychic? That really doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But anyway, Summon Undead Spirit is just perfect for Necromancer Wizard in my opinion, who often struggles with identity issues as, that guy with a bunch of skeletons and zombies following it all around. Present also on Warlock's list as well, this level 3 Necromancy spell calls forth a medium undead. It's a faster flyer than a runner, with its ghostly form possessing hovering capability as well. It's immune to necrotic and poison damage, as well as exhaustion, frightened, paralyzed and poison conditions, which most likely makes this creature more resilient than the caster in control, casting this spell, making this creature, right? All 3 forms that have distinct attacks deal necrotic damage. Ghostly form is incorporeal and its deathly touch causes targets to be frightened, which is a potent control effect against so many monsters and enemies. Putrid form can be even more debilitating, with its festering aura causing poisoned condition and its rotting claw turning that poisoned condition into a full-on paralysis. Skeletal form is the only one with the ranged option, which also deals the most damage, but in my opinion that extra damage isn't isn't enough to compensate for the much more synergy that Ghostly and Putrid form offer, you know, in relation to other party members. That actually concludes the spells. Overall, I like the concept design approach and the overall idea behind these spells quite a lot. Summoning, often called minionmancy, is often frowned upon because it floods the battlefield with masses of weaker creatures that significantly disrupt the initiative flow and often turn very deadly encounters into child's play via massive action economy superiority. This part about, you know, turning deadly encounters into easy ones might not be as bad. I mean, the DMs kind of can always ramp up the deadliness, but the fact, you know, spamming a bunch of weak monsters on a battlefield, you know, prolonging the combat encounter, stalling things down, you know, grinding things to a halt is a problem. Therefore, I'd be glad to see at least a few of these spells make it to an official release sometime in the near future. It would make summoning classes much more streamlined for both the players and DM's enjoyment of the game. Now, magic tattoos are basically a new subcategory of magic items bound to the special needles that contain magic within them. Their rarity determines the size, and they otherwise follow all the rules for magic items detailed in Dungeon Master's Guide. An interesting thing with these tattoos is that, at least in their playtest form, iteration, whatever you want to call it, you can be attuned to more than 3 of them at the same time, as they all count as single magic item for the purpose of attunement slots. All characters have 3 attunement slots, so you can have like a lot of these tattoos and still have 2 more attunement slots to use for all of your other items that require attunement, right? So in a way, this is kind of good. Like, this might even be slightly overpowered depending on, well, how many tattoos the DM gives to you, right? I feel like these can be an interesting way to introduce more flavors of magic into the world, especially if the campaign features tribalistic primeval themes more prominently, or you as a DM just want more magic variety in your world, in some way, shape or form. Absorbing tattoo is situational and setting campaign specific. In other words, if you never fight a creature dealing crap ton of any of these non-physical damage types, it won't be as relevant. That doesn't mean it's not powerful. If the campaign features a legion of fiends that you have to go through, red-colored variant of this tattoo will most likely save your skin, yes, pun intended, once or twice or maybe even more times, maybe, you know, even preventing the TPK too. Barrier tattoo is very good if you ask me, especially on spellcasters and other characters lacking in armor proficiencies. It's the equivalent of studded leather light armor as an uncommon item, half plate medium armor as a rare item, and plate mail as a very rare item. Granted, it doesn't synergize with feats like medium and heavy armor master, for example, but it also doesn't require proficiency and doesn't impose disadvantage on stealth checks. It's extremely versatile and useful on a very wide range of classes and characters who don't have, as I said, you know, proficiencies with armors and who maybe don't like having disadvantage on dexterity stealth checks, but they like having high armor class, right? So this is the thing to give them to, you know, to anybody. This is like super convenient, you know, consistent across wide range of classes. And, you know, if you're a DM who just wants to give something useful without, you know, spending too much time thinking what to do, this can be something to give out in your campaign. So there you go. Coiling Grasp tattoo is kind of powerful too because it's supposed to be uncommon, suggesting it's kind of relatively easy to obtain it in terms of magic item rarity. It has a pseudo cantrip magical effect with a solid 3d6 force damage and a decent DC 14 for a grappled condition. A perfect thing to have as a backup plan if you're a ranged specialist or you just hate seeing enemies fleeing away from combat before they drop dead. I'm not saying this is overpowered, but be careful giving this like to your players if you're a DM. This does actually probably trump a lot of cantrips at like lower levels, and you know, it's something that you can do as your action, so you just go in there, do it, and that's pretty much gonna be your go-to button. as a player, you know, you ignore everything else because this would clearly be the superior option. Force damage is not like it's the least resisted and immune damage type in the game. 3d6 is a decent amount of damage. Grappled condition is pretty clutch too. So yeah, it's not overpowered, but be careful, you know, sometimes just giving these items out to players forces them to just use those items and forget all of their other capabilities. But anyway, Eldritch Claw Tattoo would be absolutely perfect for monks and very good for races such as Tabaxi and Aarakocra, whose claws and talons improve their unarmed strikes. +1 magic weaponry is honestly good on its own for an uncommon item, but the fact you can further augment your unarmed strikes for extra damage and ridiculous reach would make such characters much more viable when faced with difficult terrain, flying enemies, ranged attackers, and other issues commonly plaguing the unarmed specialist, you know, melee characters in general. Blood Fury Tattoo is a legendary item that probably makes all of you Barbarian, Paladin, and Fighter fanboys salivate like Pavlov's dogs. Not gonna lie, I'm foaming at the mouth just reading through these effects myself. So, permanent increase of critical hit range, extra critical hit necrotic damage, 4d6. That also provides the same amount of temporary hit points, so if you're a melee character who takes some damage, now you can get those lost hit points back. And a reaction attack option that, when paired with Sentinel and Polearm Master feats, which is often the case with melee characters, effectively guarantees you get a reaction attack 100% of the time as long as you are in melee reach. Yeah, this thing is a legendary item as it should be. Illuminator's Tattoo isn't as thought-provoking as, you know, some of the other ones, but in campaigns focusing more on story, intrigue, mysteries, and scheming, maybe not going as much and as high in levels as some other campaigns, an item like this one can see quite an extensive use and to a great success. You could easily establish secret lines of communication distributed via official channels without anybody even knowing. This can help facilitate resistance movements, coordination easier maybe, or help you get in touch with King's Court's insiders too scared to speak out about certain issues and problems within the kingdom openly. As always, these types of options are a goldmine for creative players, so if you're a DM who likes giving out interesting stuff out, this is probably something for you to consider. Life Well Tattoo is basically a free once per day casting of Death Ward spell. It's listed as rare. I don't think making it uncommon would break anything, as the DM can always just ramp up the encounter deadliness, but rare seems fair too, right? Ghost Stab Tattoo is another rare item, but this one has 3 charges that replenish at dawn. By spending 1 charge and the bonus action, you can turn yourself incorporeal until the end of your next turn, which provides resistance to non-magical physical damage, immunity to grappled and restrained condition, and the ability to move through creatures and objects as if they were difficult terrain, taking damage if you don't stop your movement in an unoccupied space. The immunity to grappled and restrained conditions is probably the most significant benefit of the 3, though resistance to non-magic physical damage can be clutch too, especially if you are a squishy caster who gets surrounded by a bunch of enemies. Masquerade Tattoo allows you to move it around and about your body freely using your bonus action. It also provides you with 1 free casting of Disguise Self spell. For a common item, this seems alright, if not even just a bit too powerful, as common items are generally supposed to be more on the flavor side, you know, creative use instead of just like strictly defined mechanical property, but I don't think it's gonna break anything in its current form if it gets introduced officially. Spell Wrought Tattoo is basically a glorified spell scroll that doesn't even go higher than level 5 spells. It's a cool and flavorful way to get a one-time casting of a spell, but it's mechanically nowhere near impressive or creative or unique or new as some of these other ones. Shadowfell Brand Tattoo is kind of like an absorbing tattoo, but instead of providing immunity to just one single type of damage, it provides resistance to the damage you take, making it much more generic but also much more consistent and useful in a wider range of situations, working on all damage types. Now, the wording is really poor with this one in my opinion. I assume the design intent of this tattoo is to provide resistance to the trigger damage only, but it's not entirely clear based on how it's been written out. Also, it doesn't specify whether it works against just one of the trigger damage types or, you know, all of them. There are certainly monsters dealing 2 or even more damage types out there in a single, like, instance of damage. I assume it's temporary resistance to all trigger damage, but maybe I'm wrong. It doesn't take much to make these things clear, so please, Wizards of the Coast, if any of you are watching this video, make our lives easier, will ya? If you enjoyed this long-winded inspection of the newest 2020 Unearthed Arcana, where I progressively kept losing my breath and stumbling across my words, consider spilling the tattoo ink all over the like and subscribe buttons and coating the notification bell icon in the blackest strand of Shadowfell Brand Tattoo. Chuck a buck for the effort on my Patreon page. It's been inked in the description below this video. It's not mandatory, but you know, do it for the art or something. I don't know, I'm losing creativity at this point. Special shout out to all of my current patrons. There's been a surge of new members recently, so Mike, Matthew, Ewing, BardlyManHardlyTrying, Larry Hocken, Rogor, Kaleron, SuburbanHell, Cory Clausen, Kwak, Aidan Harth, Gary Kors, Oldham, Joel C Alcazar, Bredwin, your boy Fox, Sean Mannozzi Stefano, Kwak, Guys, Bittenby, Jeremy, Siroy, Shattered Silence, Devin Yak, Lunatic Dragon, Dark Sin, Ebonhawk, Jeff Clem, Alex Bell, Harry Howell, Crack Mask, Alexandre Ode, Nathan Ori, Nicholas Joseph, Francisco Martinez, Camilo Vargas, Kila Nudel 18, Russ Helms, Beru Chan, The Undead Owl Goddess, Ted Rygard, Stephen Keyser, B. Jones, John Saylor, Neko, Derek Peck, Barb and Wern is posting, Tristan Border, Edward Tersinski, Devon Troger, Sean Walker, James Randolph, Rich, Wesley Schick, Matthew Joyce, Edge Walker, and that's pretty much it. Thank you for your continued support, all new and old patrons. I'll make sure to bring more OP stuff for you. With everything said and done, MinMax Munchkin out. Talk to you soon.